Welcome back to CNN's special coverage, the first day of Donald Trump's historic criminal trial in Manhattan. I'm Wolf Blitzer in Washington. Aaron Burnett is outside the courthouse in New York. This is a day without equal in American history. A former president of the United States, now a criminal defendant on trial. Right now, jury selection is underway. Hundreds and hundreds of Manhattan residents will eventually be whittled down to 18, namely 12 jurors and 6 alternate jurors. Aaron, over to you.
Yeah, Wolf, it is amazing because you're going to have hundreds of people going through to actually get to that final small number. And this is, while the center and the heart of all of it, only one item on the agenda for the judge today. Judge Merchan also heard arguments about key evidence in the case and set a date for a hearing to determine whether Trump has violated his gag order. That's set for a week from Wednesday. Phil Mattingly and Paula Reed are back with me. And Paula, okay, so what I'm fascinated by is what's going on, okay, in the room. And you are getting now a read of just, sort of who's walking where, who's looking at what. What are you hearing?
This is fascinating because now, after several hours, this pool of 96 potential jurors, they are now in the room with former President Trump. And as you would expect, there is at least some recognition on the part of these potential jurors that they are in the room with the most famous man in the world. Now, our colleagues inside, because there are no cameras inside, report that when Trump was introduced as the defendant, he looked at the potential jurors and sort of smirked. Some of them are giggling, talking to one another. But the first question out of the gate from the judge after he introduced the case and the defendant is he said, quote, "If you have an honest, legitimate, good faith reason to believe you cannot serve on this case or cannot be fair and impartial, please let me know." So this is going to be the first cut, if you will. Is there some reason that you cannot serve? Now, those can be logistical reasons or some limitation you have. It can also just be some reason you believe you can't be impartial. And the Trump team has asked them to separate out these two issues because they want to preserve this on appeal. They want to be able to be like, look how many people we lost just based on an inability to be impartial. So that's what's happening right now inside.
And amazing, some of the, someone walks by, looks at the former president and smiles, not indicating bias or anything, just, okay, well, former president of the United States is sitting here. 2 women walk by, sort of talking to each other. Interesting, because often in these big rooms like this, people, it's New Yorkers, they just start talking and all of a sudden they have a conversation, but this is what's actually going on, like real people coming out of their daily lives and sitting in this room right now.
I think to some degree you can become numb to this is unprecedented, this is historic. We've said that so often over the course of the last 7, 8, 9 years that you don't necessarily kind of grasp the import of a moment like this. Can you imagine being a New Yorker who is summoned and is walking into a room and has to stare at the former president of the United States, the presumptive Republican nominee to be the next president of the United States, and realize that this is the first criminal trial and you may be selected as one of 12 or an alternate on that jury? That's actually happening right now in this moment for a case that I think a lot of people didn't think was going to be the #1 case or the biggest threat to Trump, for either his personal freedom or his political prospects. This is happening. It's happening now. And these individuals will decide, at least 12 of them and some alternates, whether or not he gets off or whether or not he's found guilty.
And Paul, it's amazing. You're talking about the lawyers in this case. Okay, they're used to jury selection. They should be if you're involved with this. You're used to, you get 10 strikes and hundreds of people come through. You should be very familiar with this process and this court and New York rules. And yet none of them have ever been in this situation before either. And it feels like that's something worth emphasizing, right? None of them have been with the stakes this high trying to make a decision about when someone says they are fit to serve on this jury. Is that actually a red flag in and of itself? How do you sort through that room?
It's a great question, but yeah, we've never had a circumstance, right, where the most famous man arguably in the world is on criminal trial for a story that most people are somewhat aware of. It is a challenge both for the prosecutors and also for the defense, and that's why this jury questionnaire, they're going to go through and answer these questions, was designed the way it was. Where do you get your news? So what are your thoughts on former President Trump? Do you have any sort of allegiance or participation in far-right extremist groups? Similar questions that we saw posed to potential jurors in other civil cases that Trump has faced, but the stakes now so much higher with the possibility that he could face jail time. Now we're getting these live updates from our colleagues inside. They're going through these jurors one by one. They've raised their hand if they believe they cannot serve or cannot be impartial, and the judge is going through getting their jury numbers. Now it's unclear how many opted out in this first round.
That's what I want to know. How many raised their
yeah.
hand?
You and the both sides as well. So
Yeah.
it's going to take a while maybe before we get that number, but that's what's happening literally a moment ago inside.
Right, those questions were asked. All right, so on that, let's bring into our conversation now the jury consultant, Alan Turkheimer. And Alan, appreciate your time. So you heard what Paula just said. They've now just asked the question, raise your hand if you can't be impartial or if you have another reason. Hands have gone up. We don't yet know the number of hands that went up. But how significant is this particular moment in the room?
It's a huge moment in the room. Now, some jurors are going to come in, but they're going to have extreme views. Some might think, raise their hand and say, you know what, Donald Trump is the only person that's keeping us safe from deranged globalists. And then on the other end, more likely, you'll have people that say, I can't stand him. He's a childish buffoon that's power hungry. Most people are going to be in the middle of that, but those people are going to weed themselves out. And then it's a question of, can the jurors who remain standing, can they be fair and impartial? Now, they have their own biases, they have their own beliefs, but how strong do they feel the way they feel? And it's also incumbent upon the lawyers to detect bias, because some of the jurors or potential jurors might think, I can be fair, I can be impartial, I can give the president or former president a fair shake, but maybe they really can't be. So there's going to be some real thorough analyses taking place into what makes the jurors tick, what their attitudes are, what their experiences have been, in order to decide whether or not they make it to the next stage of the process.
And you know, lawyers will go through lists of potential jurors in advance when they get names, right? And they'll go through and try to anticipate possible strikes, right? I mean, I know in other venues that's the case. Then you get in the room, and now there's social media, and you look up the people, see what they've posted, et cetera. So some of this would be very clear. But in the sense where you only get 10 strikes per side, and you could have hundreds of people in these days after days filing through. As a jury consultant, how do you strategize how to save your strikes?
So each side has 10 strikes. Those are peremptories where they don't have to give any reason at all. Now, they can't systematically strike jurors based on race or gender or any protected class, but those are given to each side. But before that happens, if a juror is so biased and it seems like that juror cannot be fair and impartial, then the lawyers can exercise a cause challenge. So it's going to be whittled down based on that before we even get to the 10 strikes per side. So if a juror has such bias, the judge isn't going to take a strike away from either of the sides. A judge then can act and say, all right, this juror is so biased one way or the other, probably anti-Trump given the venue. But then the judge can say, after a cause challenge is made, I'm going to remove this juror from the pool so that when it gets closer to when the sides exercise their strikes, the pool is a little more narrowed down and fair-minded.
Alan, I want to bring Paula Reed in. She's not only been covering this from the beginning, also a lawyer herself, but I know she has a question.
So how long do you think this is going to take? Today's been moving pretty slowly. In the future, we're going to have some hearings before jury selection even gets underway. How long, given that these are 4-day weeks, do you expect it's going to take to seat this jury?
I think it's going to take a good chunk of this week and probably into next week. A lot of it just depends on how efficient things are and how much of the bias gets revealed by the individual jurors. Now, it's actually to Trump's benefit if jurors come in and they indicate that they have bias and then they're removed from the pool. And that can take some time, it can take a little longer. It just kind of depends. But the interesting thing is, and it might sound counterintuitive, if jurors harbor bias against Donald Trump, they want to know that. And he's sitting right there. They're 10, 15 feet away from him, and they can speak their mind freely. And New Yorkers are known to do that. They can say whatever they want, and then Trump's team just has to say, thank you, I appreciate it, and have a good day.
That is a whole new level to this. It's quite fascinating. I wonder if they're aware that they can do that, because you're right. I could see a lot of people saying, oh my gosh, can you imagine an unfettered environment to just say whatever you want to the former president for any American, whether they like him or not, but in New York, wow. All right, Alan, thanks so much. Really appreciate that.